3-year-old Emma Martinez hadn't uttered a single word in 7 months. Not one syllable. Not even a whisper. Her dark eyes, which her grandmother Rosa remembered sparkling with mischief and laughter, now stared vacantly through the tall windows of the Houston County Courthouse. The little girl sat motionless on a wooden bench, her tiny legs dangling high above the polished marble floor, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy, the only thing she'd held onto since that horrible October night. Prosecutor James Mitchell paced his cramped third-floor office like a caged lion, his footsteps echoing off walls lined with law books and case files. Papers scattered across his desk told a story he desperately needed Emma to confirm in court. Crime scene photos showed shattered glass, overturned furniture, and blood, so much blood. Witness statements filled page after page, but they were all circumstantial. Security footage showed a figure in dark clothing, but the face was obscured. Forensic evidence placed the suspect at the scene, but without Emma's testimony identifying him as the intruder, the case was circumstantial at best. 7 months, James muttered to himself, running his fingers through graying hair that had gained more silver streaks since taking this case. 7 months of silence, and we have 72 hours. His office door was cracked open, and through it, he could see Emma and her grandmother Rosa in the waiting area. Rosa Martinez was a pillar of strength wrapped in a 62-year-old frame that had weathered too many storms. She'd raised Emma since birth when her daughter, Emma's mother, had disappeared into the darkness of addiction. Rosa worked double shifts at a medical clinic to provide for them, and she'd been at work that October night when evil knocked on their apartment door. James had watched Rosa try everything over these past months. She'd taken Emma to 3 different child psychologists, each one kind and patient, armed with degrees and techniques backed by years of research. They'd tried play therapy, where Emma could act out her feelings with dolls and toys. They'd tried art therapy, encouraging her to draw what she couldn't say. They'd even tried music therapy, hopping melodies might unlock what trauma had sealed shut. Nothing worked. Emma would participate sometimes, moving toys around or scribbling with crayons, but her lips remained pressed together as if sewn shut by invisible thread. The therapists all said the same thing. She witnessed something traumatic. Her mind is protecting her by shutting down verbal communication. It's not uncommon in children who have experienced severe trauma. She needs time. But time was the one luxury James didn't have. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Friday, just 3 days away. If Emma couldn't testify, if she couldn't identify the man who'd invaded their home that night, if she couldn't tell the court what she'd seen from her hiding place behind the living room couch, then Vincent Cara would walk free. And James knew, down to his bones, he knew, that Cara was guilty. Cara was a 34-year-old career criminal with a rap sheet that read like a horror novel. Breaking and entering, aggravated assault, armed robbery. He'd served 2 stints in Huntsville State Prison, and each time he'd come out worse than before. This time, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Emma's grandfather, Miguel Martinez, had been a good man, a retired postal worker who loved his granddaughter more than life itself. He'd been home alone with Emma that night, putting her to bed. When Cara broke in looking for money, he believed Miguel kept hidden in the apartment. The confrontation had been brutal. Miguel had fought back, trying to protect his granddaughter. The crime scene told the story of a desperate struggle, a lamp shattered, a coffee table overturned, picture frames knocked from walls. In the chaos, Emma had hidden behind the couch, watching through a small gap as the nightmare unfolded. She'd seen everything. She was the only witness who could place Cara's face at that apartment, the only one who could confirm what forensics suggested, but couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt. Miguel hadn't survived the night. He died 3 hours later at Memorial Hermann Hospital, Rosa holding his hand, Emma already locked in traumatized silence at home with a victim advocate. James picked up a photo from his desk, Emma's kindergarten picture from last year before the trauma. She was grinning at the camera, missing her 2 front teeth, wearing a bright yellow dress with sunflowers. That little girl looked like she could light up a room. The Emma sitting outside his office now seemed like a ghost of that child. A knock at his door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting his paralegal with more documents to review. Instead, Detective Sarah Chen stepped through the doorway, and she wasn't alone. She held a leather leash in her hand, and at the other end of that leash sat the most magnificent German shepherd James had ever seen. The dog's coat was a rich golden brown, his eyes a warm chocolate color that seemed almost human in their intelligence. He sat perfectly still, his posture proud but not aggressive, his tail swishing gently across the floor. "James," Sarah said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd spent 15 years on the force solving cases others had given up on. "I know you're out of options. I've been following Emma's case, and I have someone who might help." James looked at the dog, then back at Sarah, his eyebrows raised in confusion. "Sarah, I don't think a therapy dog visit is going to." "Rex isn't a therapy dog," Sarah interrupted, stepping fully into the office. The German shepherd moved with her, his movements graceful and measured. "He's a courthouse facility dog. There's a difference, a big one." James leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "I'm listening." "Rex has been trained specifically to help traumatized witnesses testify in court," Sarah explained, and as she spoke, the dog's ears perked up at his name. "He's worked with assault victims, domestic violence survivors, elderly witnesses with dementia. He has an 87% success rate in helping witnesses who initially couldn't testify find their voice. He's been certified by the Courthouse Dogs Foundation and has worked in 17 states. Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Emma is 3 years old. She's not a teenager who's scared to testify. She's a toddler who's completely shut down. She hasn't spoken to trained psychologists, to her own grandmother, to anyone." "I know," Sarah said softly, "but Rex isn't anyone. He's helped children before, James. Not this young, I'll admit, but—" She paused and her expression grew serious. "What do you have to lose? Without Emma's testimony, Kara walks. You and I both know it." James looked past Sarah to the waiting area where Rosa sat with Emma. The little girl was rocking slightly, clutching Mr. Hoppy, her eyes fixed on nothing. His heart ached. Rosa's eyes met his through the doorway, and in them he saw desperation mixed with the faintest glimmer of hope. "What do we have to lose?" James repeated quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. He pushed off from his desk and walked to where Rosa sat. "Mrs. Martinez, Detective Chen has a proposal, something unconventional." Rosa looked up, her weathered face etched with exhaustion and grief. "What kind of proposal?" Sarah knelt down to Rosa's level, Rex sitting calmly beside her. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Rex. He's a specially trained dog who helps people testify in court. I'd like permission to introduce him to Emma. No pressure, no expectations. Just see if they connect." Rosa's eyes moved from Sarah to the dog, then down to her silent granddaughter. Emma hadn't even looked up at Rex's presence. Rosa's voice cracked when she spoke. "Will it hurt her? Will it make things worse?" "No, ma'am," Sarah said gently. "Rex is trained to be completely non-threatening. If Emma doesn't respond to him, we'll walk away. But if there's even a chance he can help her speak, isn't it worth trying?" Rosa looked at Emma, at the shell of the vibrant child she'd once been. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, we'll try." James felt his chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in weeks, hope. It was fragile, tentative, probably foolish, but it was there. "I have a quiet room prepared," Sarah said, standing. "Conference room B. It's private, comfortable, and away from all the courtroom chaos. Whenever you're ready." As they prepared to make their way down the hall, James watched the little girl who held the key to justice in her locked-away memories. In 72 hours, everything would be decided. A man's freedom, a family's closure, a system's ability to protect its most vulnerable witnesses. Everything now depended on a traumatized 3-year-old, and a dog named Rex. Rex wasn't supposed to be a courthouse dog. In fact, he wasn't supposed to be much of anything in the world of law enforcement. 5 years earlier, when he was just a rambunctious puppy with oversized paws and ears that flopped comically when he ran, Rex had entered the Houston Police Department's K-9 training program with high hopes. His bloodline was impeccable. His father had been a decorated narcotics detection dog. His mother an award-winning patrol canine who'd taken down 3 armed suspects in her career. Rex had the genes, the drive, and the intelligence that trainers looked for in elite police dogs. But he also had something else, a heart that was too soft for the harsh realities of street patrol. "He's empathetic," his first trainer, Officer Marcus Webb, had written in the evaluation report after Rex washed out of patrol training at 18 months old. Almost unusually so, when suspects show fear or distress, Rex hesitates. He doesn't have the aggressive edge needed for apprehension work. He's too gentle, too sensitive to human emotion. In the world of police K-9s, too gentle was essentially a death sentence for a career. Most dogs who failed patrol or detection training were returned to breeders or adopted out as pets. Rex was hours away from that fate when Detective Sarah Chen walked into the K-9 facility looking for something very different. Sarah had spent 12 years working in the Special Victims Unit, investigating crimes against children, sexual assault cases, and domestic violence. She'd watched countless victims sit in witness boxes, terrified and traumatized, unable to find their voices when facing their abusers across a courtroom. She'd seen cases fall apart because witnesses couldn't testify, couldn't endure cross-examination, couldn't handle the overwhelming pressure of the legal system. Then she'd attended a conference in Seattle where she met a handler from the Courthouse Dogs Foundation. She watched a golden retriever named Bailey help a 7-year-old girl testify against her abuser. The child had been mute with fear until Bailey laid his head in her lap. Then words flowed, truth emerged, and justice was served. Sarah returned to Houston with a mission: start a courthouse facility dog program. When she met Rex, she knew immediately he was special. His weakness in patrol training was exactly the strength she needed. That sensitivity to human emotion, that gentle nature, that ability to read people and respond with comfort rather than force. These were superpowers in the world of trauma-informed victim services. The training had been intensive. For 2 years, Rex learned skills most police dogs never touched. He learned to remain perfectly still for hours, even in stressful courtroom environments filled with loud voices and sudden movements. He learned to sense anxiety and fear, responding with calming behaviors. A gentle paw touch, steady eye contact, the weight of his head resting on a trembling hand. He learned to ignore distractions, to focus entirely on the person he was helping, creating a bubble of safety in the midst of legal chaos. But Rex's most remarkable gift wasn't something that could be taught. It was intuitive, almost mystical. He could look at a person and somehow understand the depth of their pain. His warm chocolate-brown eyes seemed to communicate something profound. "I see you. I'm here. You're safe." Sarah had watched him work miracles over the past 3 years. There was Marcus, a 16-year-old boy who'd witnessed his father's murder but couldn't speak about it without having panic attacks. Rex sat beside him during testimony, and Marcus's hand stayed buried in his fur the entire time. The boy's voice shook, but he got through it. Justice was served. There was Patricia, a 72-year-old grandmother who'd been assaulted in her home and was too terrified to face her attacker in court. Rex accompanied her to the witness stand, lying across her feet. His weight grounded her, his presence gave her courage. She testified for 45 minutes, never once looking at the defendant, only at Rex. There was Jennifer, a 19-year-old college student whose assault case had been delayed 3 times because she couldn't enter the courtroom without hyperventilating. Rex met her at the courthouse entrance, walked beside her through the metal detectors, sat with her during breaks. When she finally took the stand, his steady breathing seemed to regulate her own. She spoke clearly, firmly, truthfully. 17 successful testimonies. 17 witnesses who found their voices because an 85-pound German Shepherd showed them they weren't alone. But Emma Martinez would be different. Sarah knew that the moment she read the case file. Emma wasn't a teenager who understood the legal process. She wasn't an adult who could be reasoned with about civic duty and justice. She was a 3-year-old child whose grandfather had been murdered in front of her, whose entire world had shattered in one violent night, whose mind had shut down so completely that 7 months of professional therapy hadn't produced a single word. Sarah had worked with children before, but never anyone this young. The youngest had been 6, and that case had been challenging enough. 3-year-olds process trauma differently. Their understanding of reality, of danger, of permanence was still developing. Emma's silence wasn't just fear. It was a complete psychological retreat from a world that had become too terrifying to engage with. As Sarah stood in Prosecutor James Mitchell's office, holding Rex's leash, watching the skepticism play across his weathered face, she felt the familiar flutter of doubt in her stomach. What if this didn't work? What if Rex's presence traumatized Emma further? What if the connection that had formed with 17 other witnesses simply didn't translate to a toddler? But then she looked down at Rex, and he looked back at her with those knowing eyes. His tail swished gently against the floor, a movement that communicated calm confidence. He'd been watching Emma through the doorway the entire conversation, his head tilted slightly, his body language completely relaxed. Sarah had learned to read his signals after thousands of hours together. Right now, his posture said, "I can help her." "Rex has helped dozens testify," Sarah said to James, her voice steady despite her internal uncertainty. "But I'll be honest, never anyone this young." She reached down and scratched behind Rex's ears, and he leaned into her touch. He washed out of patrol training for being too gentle, too empathetic, but those exact qualities make him perfect for this work. He doesn't just comfort people, he connects with them on a level I can't fully explain. James looked skeptical, his arms crossed over his rumpled dress shirt. "Sarah, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "Watch," Sarah interrupted. She made a subtle hand signal, and Rex immediately shifted his attention to the doorway where Emma sat with her grandmother. Without any verbal command, the dog lowered himself into a sphinx position on the floor, making himself appear smaller, less threatening. His ears rotated forward, focused entirely on the little girl 30 feet away. His breathing slowed, became rhythmic and visible, the same calming breath pattern that therapists taught to anxiety patients. Emma hadn't looked up. She hadn't even acknowledged Rex's presence. But Sarah saw something, the tiniest change in the child's posture. Her rocking had slowed almost imperceptibly. Her grip on the stuffed rabbit had loosened just a fraction. Rex saw it too. His tail gave one gentle thump against the floor. "He already knows," Sarah said softly. "He can sense her pain. He wants to help." Rosa Martinez appeared in the doorway, her face lined with exhaustion and desperate hope. "Detective Chen, Mr. Mitchell explained your proposal." Her voice cracked. "Will this really work? Can a dog help my granddaughter speak?" Sarah turned to face the grandmother, seeing the raw grief and fear in her eyes. "Mrs. Martinez, I can't make promises. Every witness is different, every trauma is unique. But I can tell you that Rex has helped people who thought they could never face a courtroom. He has a gift for making people feel safe when they're at their most vulnerable." "Emma's always been afraid of dogs," Rosa said, wringing her hands. "Even small ones. She'd hide behind my legs at the park when we'd see them." "That's actually okay," Sarah explained. "Rex is trained for exactly that response. He knows how to approach fearful people, how to make himself non-threatening. He won't rush her, won't demand anything from her. He'll just be present." James cleared his throat. "Mrs. Martinez, we're running out of time and options. The preliminary hearing is in 3 days. Without Emma's testimony, the man who killed your husband walks free. I know this is unconventional, but—" "I'll try anything," Rosa interrupted, her eyes filling with tears. "Anything that might bring my baby girl back to me. Anything that might give Miguel justice." Sarah nodded. "Conference room B is ready. It's quiet, private, comfortable. No pressure, no expectations. We'll let Emma and Rex meet on Emma's terms at Emma's pace." As they prepared to walk down the hallway, Sarah knelt beside Rex and placed both hands on either side of his face, looking directly into his eyes. This was their ritual before every case, their moment of silent communication. "This is important, buddy," she whispered. "This little girl needs you more than anyone has before. Can you do this?" Rex's answer was a gentle lick across her cheek and a soft exhale that sounded almost like a sigh. His body language radiated calm determination. He was ready. Sarah stood, straightened her uniform, and took a deep breath. "Okay," she said. "Let's see if we can work a miracle." As they walked toward the conference room, Sarah and Rex in front, Emma carried by her grandmother, James following behind with his case files, Sarah felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. In 3 days, a courtroom would decide whether a violent criminal went free or faced justice. But before that could happen, a traumatized 3-year-old had to trust a German shepherd enough to unlock 7 months of silence. Everything depended on what happened in the next hour. Rex's tail swished steadily as they walked, his stride confident and calm. If Sarah didn't know better, she'd swear the dog understood exactly what was at stake. And maybe, somehow, he did. Conference room B felt like a different world from the rest of the courthouse. Someone, probably the victim services coordinator, had transformed the typically sterile space into something resembling a children's playroom. Soft cream-colored carpet covered the floor instead of cold linoleum. Pastel blue walls replaced institutional gray. A small bookshelf in the corner held picture books with bright covers. There were cushions, a child-sized table with crayons scattered across it, and even a basket of stuffed animals that looked donated from various courthouse employees' children. But despite the effort to make it welcoming, the room still held an underlying tension. This wasn't a playroom. It was a last-chance meeting between a traumatized child and a dog who might, just might, hold the key to unlocking her silence. Sarah entered first, Rex walking calmly beside her. She'd removed his official service vest during the elevator ride, not wanting the formal gear to make him seem more intimidating. Now he was just a dog, albeit a very large, very well-trained one. She guided him to the far corner of the room, the spot farthest from the door, giving Emma maximum space and control. "Sit," Sarah commanded softly, and Rex immediately complied. His posture was relaxed, ears forward but not alert, tail resting naturally on the carpet. He looked peaceful, almost sleepy, like a dog who'd just woken from a pleasant nap. It was all intentional. Every aspect of his body language was designed to communicate. "I'm not a threat. I'm not scary, I'm just here." Rosa entered next, carrying Emma on her hip. The little girl's face was buried in her grandmother's shoulder, her small arms wrapped tightly around Rosa's neck. The stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, dangled from one of Emma's hands, its worn ears dragging against Rosa's arm. James Mitchell stood in the doorway, his file folder clutched against his chest. His normally composed prosecutor's face showed naked hope mixed with anxiety. Sarah caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of her head. He needed to leave. Too many people would overwhelm Emma. He understood immediately. With a nod, he stepped back into the hallway and quietly pulled the door closed. Through the small window, his silhouette remained visible, watching, waiting, praying for a miracle. The room fell into heavy silence. Rosa moved slowly to the middle of the room and carefully lowered herself into a cushioned chair, keeping Emma on her lap. The little girl's face remained hidden, her body rigid with tension. Sarah could see the child's small shoulders trembling slightly. "Emma," Rosa said softly, her weathered hand stroking her granddaughter's dark hair. "This is Detective Sarah and that's her friend Rex. They came to visit you. Isn't that nice?" No response. Emma burrowed deeper into her grandmother's embrace. Sarah settled onto the floor about 15 feet away from them, crossing her legs and making herself appear smaller and less threatening. Rex remained in his sitting position beside her, utterly still except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. "Hi, Emma," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to look at us if you don't want to. We're just going to sit here for a while. Rex is a very good sitter. He can sit for hours and hours. Sometimes I think he might be part statue." Still nothing. Emma's face stayed hidden against Rosa's shoulder. Minutes ticked by. 5, 10. The silence wasn't uncomfortable for Sarah. She'd learned patience in this work. But she could see Rosa shifting nervously, probably wondering if this whole thing was a waste of time. In the hallway, James's shadow moved as he checked his watch, undoubtedly calculating how many hours they had left before the preliminary hearing. Sarah didn't try to force conversation. She'd learned that silence could be powerful, that sometimes the absence of pressure created space for healing. She simply sat, one hand resting on Rex's back, letting the moment unfold at its own pace. At the 12-minute mark, something shifted. Emma's head turned slightly, not much, just a fraction of an inch, but enough that one dark eye peeked out from Rosa's shoulder. That eye fixed on Rex. Sarah felt Rex's muscles tense slightly under her hand. He'd noticed. Of course he had. The dog had a sixth sense for these moments. "That's Rex," Sarah said softly, not looking directly at Emma. "He's 5 years old. His favorite things are tennis balls, salmon treats, and naps in sunny spots. He's actually quite lazy for a police dog." Emma's other eye appeared. Now both eyes were watching Rex from the safety of her grandmother's embrace. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, but Sarah saw his tail twitch once, a tiny movement that only someone who knew him well would recognize as excitement. 3 more minutes passed. Then slowly, incrementally, Emma lifted her head fully from Rosa's shoulder. Her small face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from months of crying and sleepless nights. But she was looking at Rex now, really looking at him. Rex held her gaze with those warm chocolate eyes, his expression somehow conveying both strength and gentleness. Sarah had seen him do this before, create a connection through nothing but a look. It was as if he could communicate directly with the wounded parts of people's souls, speaking a language that transcended words. "He's very gentle," Sarah continued, her voice maintaining that soft, unhurried cadence. "Some people think big dogs are scary, but Rex is actually a big softy. Want to know a secret?" Emma didn't respond, but her eyes flickered to Sarah for just a moment before returning to Rex. "Rex is afraid of the vacuum cleaner," Sarah stage whispered, leaning toward Emma conspiratorially. "Whenever I clean my apartment, he runs and hides under the bed. Can you imagine? A big police dog scared of a silly vacuum." Was that the tiniest hint of a smile? Sarah couldn't be sure, but Emma's expression had softened almost imperceptibly. Then Rex did something remarkable, something Sarah hadn't commanded, something that came purely from his own intuition. He yawned. It was a massive, exaggerated yawn, his jaws opening wide to reveal his pink tongue and white teeth. His eyes scrunched up, his ears flattened slightly, and he made a small squeaking sound as he stretched his front legs forward. Then, in one fluid motion, he rolled completely onto his back. His 4 paws stuck up in the air like tree branches. His tongue lolled out of his mouth at a ridiculous angle. His tail wagged lazily, thumping against the carpet. He looked absolutely absurd, 85 pounds of German shepherd lying belly up in complete, vulnerable surrender. Emma's eyes widened. Sarah had to suppress her own smile. Rex knew exactly what he was doing. The play dead position was the most submissive, non-threatening posture a dog could assume. It said, "Look, I'm silly. I'm harmless. I'm not scary at all." "Oh my," Rosa breathed, her own face showing surprise and the first glimmer of hope. "Emma, look at that silly dog." Rex's tail continued its lazy thump-thump-thump against the floor. One of his ears had flopped inside out, adding to his comical appearance. He made a contented grumbling sound, something between a groan and a purr. And then it happened, the moment Sarah would replay in her mind 1,000 times afterward. Emma's face changed. The tension in her small features melted away, replaced by something Sarah hadn't seen in any of the case photos or court documents, genuine curiosity mixed with the faintest hint of amusement. The little girl's death grip on her grandmother's neck loosened. Her legs, which had been wrapped tightly around Rosa's waist, began to uncurl. Her feet touched the floor. "Rex really likes belly rubs," Sarah said casually, beginning to scratch the dog's exposed stomach. Rex's back leg kicked slightly in response, his tail wagging harder. "See, he's just a big goofball." Emma stood on her own 2 feet now, still holding Mr. Hoppy in one hand but no longer using her grandmother as a shield. She was standing independently, her eyes locked on the upside-down dog making silly noises as Sarah scratched his belly. Sarah stopped scratching and moved her hands away from Rex. "Want to try?" she asked gently. "He loves when new friends give him belly rubs." For a long moment, Emma didn't move. Sarah could practically see the war happening inside the little girl's mind, fear battling against curiosity, trauma fighting against the innocent desire to pet a silly dog. Rosa held her breath. Through the window, James had pressed closer to the glass, his knuckles white around his file folder. Then Emma took one step forward, just one. Her small sneakers barely made a sound on the soft carpet. Rex's tail wagged encouragement, but the rest of him remained completely still, maintaining that vulnerable, unthreatening position. Another step, then another. Emma moved with the slow deliberation of someone approaching something both fascinating and frightening. Her eyes never left Rex's face. When she was about 5 feet away, she stopped. Sarah had frozen in place, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Rosa had her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Emma stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, so slowly that Sarah almost missed it, the little girl extended one small hand. It hovered in the air between them, trembling slightly. Rex's tail gave 3 gentle thumps. His eyes stayed soft, patient, inviting. Emma's hand moved forward another inch, then another, and then, finally, her tiny fingers made contact with soft fur. The moment her hand touched Rex's belly, something extraordinary happened. The tension that had been holding Emma's small body rigid for 7 months seemed to simply dissolve. Her shoulders dropped. Her breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, slowed and deepened. Her fingers spread wider, feeling the warmth of Rex's fur, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Rex remained perfectly still, letting Emma explore at her own pace. His eyes had closed slightly, his expression radiating pure contentment and patience. Emma took another step closer, then another. Soon she was standing right beside the upside-down dog, both of her small hands now resting on his belly. Sarah slowly rose from her position and backed away, giving them space, giving Emma complete control of the interaction. The little girl sank to her knees beside Rex. Her hands moved from his belly to his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, strong, reliable. Something Emma's world hadn't been for 7 months. And then Emma did something that made Rosa gasp and tears spring to Sarah's eyes. The little girl laid down beside Rex, curling her small body against his large one. She rested her head on his chest, right over his heart, and closed her eyes. Rex, with the gentleness of a creature who understood he was holding something precious and fragile, slowly rolled back onto his side, curving his body protectively around the tiny human. His head came to rest near hers, his breathing synchronizing with her own. They lay like that, child and dog, in perfect stillness. Emma's hand gripped Rex's fur, not frantically but with trust. For the first time in 7 months, her face looked peaceful. Sarah glanced at the window where James stood, and she saw tears streaming down the hardened prosecutor's face. Rosa had her hands clasped in prayer, whispering something in Spanish, thanks, probably, or maybe prayers that this miracle wouldn't end. 45 minutes later, Emma was still there, curled against Rex, breathing in rhythm with him. She hadn't spoken, but for the first time in 7 months she looked like she was somewhere safe. It was a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were miracles enough. Day 1 with Rex changed everything, but speaking was still a mountain Emma couldn't climb. That first session ended with the little girl falling asleep against the German Shepherd's warm body, her breathing finally steady and peaceful. When Rosa gently lifted her granddaughter to carry her home, Emma's hand remained outstretched toward Rex until they disappeared through the doorway. The dog whimpered softly, the first sound Sarah had heard him make all afternoon. "Tomorrow," Sarah promised both of them, "we'll see each other tomorrow." The next morning arrived with crushing weight. They had 48 hours until the preliminary hearing, 48 hours for a miracle that seemed impossible. James Mitchell had barely slept, his mind racing through backup plans and alternative strategies, none of them good. Without Emma's testimony, he'd have to rely entirely on circumstantial evidence. It might be enough for an indictment, but Vincent Cara's expensive defense attorney would tear it apart at trial. Conference Room B had been transformed again overnight. The victim services coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia who'd been following Emma's case, had brought in new items. A large dollhouse now sat on the low table, complete with tiny furniture and a family of bendable figurines. Picture books about dogs were stacked nearby. There were coloring books, washable markers, and a puzzle showing a German Shepherd puppy playing with children. Sarah arrived early with Rex, setting up the space carefully. She'd stopped at a pet store on the way and purchased a large, soft dog bed which she placed in the corner. Rex immediately understood, walking over and settling onto it with a contented sigh. He looked less like a working police dog and more like someone's beloved family pet ready for a lazy afternoon. When Emma arrived, still clutching Mr. Hoppy but walking on her own 2 feet instead of being carried, her eyes immediately found Rex. The German Shepherd's tail began wagging before Emma even fully entered the room. This time, there was no hesitation. Emma walked straight to the dog bed and sat down beside him, her small hand immediately finding its place in his fur. Rosa watched from a chair near the door, her expression a mixture of amazement and heartbreak. Her granddaughter had just willingly approached a large dog, something that would have terrified her before the trauma. But she still hadn't spoken, not one word. "Good morning, Emma," Sarah said warmly, settling onto the floor nearby. "Rex was so excited to see you today. He barely touched his breakfast because he was too busy looking at the door, waiting for you to arrive." Emma's eyes flickered to Sarah briefly before returning to Rex. The dog had rolled onto his side, giving Emma easy access to his belly, the position that had worked magic yesterday. "I brought some new things for us to explore," Sarah continued, gesturing to the dollhouse. "That's a pretty cool house, isn't it? It has lots of rooms and tiny furniture. Do you like dollhouses?" No verbal response, but Emma glanced at the dollhouse with clear interest. Sarah had been trained in play therapy techniques by the Courthouse Dogs Foundation. Traumatized children, especially young ones, often couldn't articulate their experiences verbally, but through play, acting out scenarios with toys and dolls, they could process and communicate what words couldn't capture. The key was creating a safe environment where the child felt in control. "Rex and I were thinking we might play with that dollhouse," Sarah said casually. "Would you like to play with us?" Emma's hand stilled in Rex's fur. She looked at the dollhouse, then at Sarah, then back at Rex. The dog gazed at her with those gentle brown eyes, his expression somehow encouraging. Slowly, Emma stood up. She walked to the table where the dollhouse sat and peered inside its rooms. Sarah joined her, careful to maintain some distance, giving Emma space. Rex rose from his bed and padded over, settling himself directly beside Emma's legs. The little girl's free hand immediately dropped to rest on his head. "Look at all these little people," Sarah said, picking up one of the bendable figurines. A small girl with dark hair, not unlike Emma. "I wonder who they are. I wonder where they live." Emma reached out and took the small girl figure from Sarah's hand. She held it carefully, examining its tiny painted face. Then she picked up two more figures, an older man and an older woman. Her small fingers trembled slightly as she positioned them in the dollhouse's living room. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral, her voice calm. "Are they a family?" Emma nodded. It was the first communicative gesture beyond eye contact that she'd made. "That's nice," Sarah said. "Families are special. They take care of each other." For the next hour, Emma played silently with the dollhouse. She moved the figures from room to room, arranged the tiny furniture, created scenarios that Sarah watched carefully. Rex remained pressed against Emma's side the entire time, his steady presence like an anchor keeping her grounded. Rosa watched from across the room, recognizing the figures Emma had chosen. The little girl, the grandfather, the grandmother. Emma was recreating her family, the family before everything shattered. Then Emma's play shifted. She picked up another figure, a tall male figure with dark hair, and brought it to the dollhouse's front door. Her small hands made the figure knock on the door. Her breathing quickened. The little girl figure was placed behind a miniature couch. Sarah felt Rex tense slightly beside Emma, sensing the child's rising anxiety. The dog shifted closer, pressing more firmly against her leg. Emma's hand immediately moved to his fur, gripping tightly. The tall figure entered the dollhouse. Emma's hands began moving faster, more frantically. The grandfather figure moved toward the intruder. The tiny furniture pieces were knocked over, a table, a lamp, pictures falling from miniature walls. Emma's breathing became rapid, her small chest rising and falling quickly. "Emma," Sarah said softly, concerned the play was becoming too overwhelming. "You're safe. Rex is right here." But Emma continued. The scene she was creating was chaotic, violent in the way a 3-year-old could make toy figures violent. The grandfather figure fell down. The intruder figure stood over him. The little girl figure remained hidden behind the couch. Suddenly, Emma swept all the figures off the table with one motion. They clattered to the floor, scattering across the carpet. Emma's hands were shaking. Her eyes were wide, her breath coming in gasps. Rosa started to stand, maternal instinct overriding everything, but Sarah held up a hand. "Wait." Rex knew what to do without any command from Sarah. The German shepherd rose up on his haunches and gently placed his large head in Emma's lap, the weight and warmth of him immediately grounding. His brown eyes looked directly into hers with an expression that seemed to say, "I understand. You're safe now. I'm here." Emma's trembling hands moved to Rex's face, holding it, feeling the solid reality of him. Her breathing began to slow, the panic receding like a wave pulling back from shore. Sarah moved carefully, picking up the scattered figures. She held up the little girl figure, the one that represented Emma. "This little girl saw something scary, didn't she?" Sarah said gently. Emma's eyes fixed on the small figure in Sarah's hand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "She was very brave," Sarah continued. "Even though she was scared, even though she saw something terrible, she survived. She's still here, and she's not alone anymore." Emma looked down at Rex, whose head remained heavy and comforting in her lap. One of her small hands moved from his face to his chest, feeling his heartbeat again. That steady rhythm that never faltered, never lied, never hurt. "Rex understands scary things," Sarah said. "He helps people who have seen scary things. That's his special job. And he wants you to know that you don't have to carry scary memories all by yourself." Emma leaned forward, pressing her forehead against Rex's. They stayed like that, breathing together, connected in a way that transcended species or language. James Mitchell, watching through the window with case files forgotten at his feet, felt something shift in his chest. Emma was processing. She was communicating through play what she couldn't say with words. But would that be enough? Would she be able to testify in less than 48 hours? The session continued for another 2 hours. Emma returned to the dollhouse multiple times, acting out variations of that night. Each time the play became too intense, too overwhelming, Rex was there. His presence allowed her to approach the trauma in small doses, to touch the memory without being consumed by it. By the end of the day, Emma had progressed from hiding behind her grandmother to sitting independently with Rex, from avoiding the dollhouse to repeatedly engaging with it, from showing no response to nodding and using gestures. But she still hadn't spoken, not a single word. As Rosa prepared to take Emma home, Sarah knelt down to the little girl's level. "Emma, you did amazing work today. You're so brave. Tomorrow, Rex and I will be here again. Would you like that?" Emma looked at Rex, then at Sarah. She nodded, a clear, definite nod. "Before you go," Sarah said, an idea forming, "would you like to give Rex something? A drawing maybe, so he can remember you when you're not here." Emma's eyes lit up, the first spark of something beyond trauma that Sarah had seen. The little girl grabbed a marker and paper from the table and quickly sketched something. It was crude, the way 3-year-old drawings are, but unmistakable. A large brown dog with a small dark-haired girl beside it. Both figures were smiling. Emma handed the drawing to Sarah, who carefully folded it and tucked it into Rex's service vest pocket. "Rex will treasure this," Sarah promised. "He'll keep it close to his heart." As Emma left, she looked back 3 times at Rex, who watched her go with patient, loving eyes. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment with Rex sprawled across her couch, the drawing Emma had made spread on the coffee table. They had 24 hours left. One day to somehow bridge the gap between silent play therapy and actual courtroom testimony. Her phone rang. James Mitchell. "Sarah," his voice was tight with stress. "I just got word. Kara's attorney is filing a motion to dismiss based on lack of direct evidence. The judge is considering it if Emma can't testify tomorrow." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah looked at Rex, who lifted his head as if he understood the stakes. "She'll be ready," Sarah said, hoping she believed it. "Rex and I will make sure of it." But as she hung up, staring at the crude drawing of a girl and a dog, she wondered if hope alone would be enough. Friday morning arrived like an executioner's footsteps, slow, heavy, inevitable. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., which gave Sarah and Rex exactly 2 hours to prepare Emma for the most important moment of her young life. 2 hours to somehow transform a silent, traumatized 3-year-old into a witness who could deliver justice. The courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. Word had spread about the unconventional testimony that might happen in Courtroom 3C. Victim advocates whispered in hallways. Court reporters checked their equipment twice. Even the bailiffs, normally stoic and unimpressed by courtroom drama, kept glancing at the clock with nervous anticipation. James Mitchell stood in the men's bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, trying to calm his racing heart. His reflection in the mirror showed a man who'd aged 5 years in the past week. Dark circles under his eyes, new lines around his mouth. This case had consumed him because he knew, deep in his bones, what would happen if Emma couldn't testify. Vincent Kara would walk out of this courthouse a free man, probably to hurt someone else's family. In Conference Room B, Sarah performed a final preparation session with Emma. The little girl had arrived wearing a soft blue dress Rosa had carefully chosen, something comfortable, not restrictive, allowing Emma to move freely. Mr. Hoppy was there too, freshly washed, his worn ears flopping as Emma carried him. Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the day. His usual playfulness was replaced by focused calm. He stayed close to Emma, his body language protective, his eyes never leaving her face. Emma, Sarah said gently, kneeling to eye level. Today we're going to a special room. It's bigger than this room and there will be more people, but Rex will be right beside you the whole time. I'll be there too. Your Grandma Rosa will be there. And you know what? Emma looked at Sarah, her dark eyes showing the first hints of trust. You don't have to be scared, Sarah continued, because Rex is the bravest dog I know, and when you're with him, some of his braveness goes into you, like magic. Emma's small hand found Rex's fur, gripping it the way a drowning person grips a life preserver. At 9:45 a.m., they made their way to Courtroom 3C. Judge Patricia Morrison had ordered extensive modifications to accommodate Emma's testimony. The witness stand, that imposing elevated box that intimidated even adult witnesses, had been removed entirely. In its place was a comfortable cushioned chair at floor level, positioned so Emma wouldn't have to face the defendant directly unless she chose to. A child psychologist, Dr. Rachel Kim, sat nearby, ready to intervene if Emma showed signs of severe distress. The gallery was nearly empty, only essential personnel allowed. Rosa sat in the front row, her rosary beads wrapped around trembling fingers, her lips moving in silent prayer. James stood at the prosecutor's table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles had turned white. And at the defense table sat Vincent Cara. He looked nothing like the monster Emma's memories had painted. He wore an expensive gray suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his face clean-shaven and almost handsome. His attorney, Marcus Webb, sat beside him in an equally expensive suit, radiating confidence and barely concealed contempt for these proceedings. Cara's eyes swept the courtroom with cool indifference until they landed on the door where Emma would enter. Then something flickered in those eyes. Recognition. Fear that a 3-year-old might destroy his freedom. It was impossible to tell. Judge Morrison entered and everyone rose. She was a 61-year-old grandmother of 5, known for her firm but fair rulings. She'd spent the previous evening reviewing case law about child witnesses, facility dogs, and trauma-informed courtroom procedures. This was unprecedented territory, but her conscience was clear. If there was even a chance this child could testify safely, she would allow it. "Be seated," she commanded, her voice carrying authority softened by compassion. "Before we bring in the witness, I want to address counsel. Mr. Webb, I've read your objections. I'm overruling them. This court has an obligation to hear testimony from all competent witnesses, and we will take every reasonable measure to facilitate that testimony. The facility dog stays." Marcus Webb rose, his jaw tight. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "So noted, Mr. Webb. Sit down." He sat, exchanging a glance with Cara that clearly said, "Don't worry, we'll appeal this circus." Judge Morrison nodded to the bailiff. "Bring in the witness." The courtroom doors opened, and Sarah entered with Emma and Rex. Every eye in the room fixed on the small procession, a little girl in a blue dress, a large German shepherd, and a detective who looked like she was leading them into battle. Emma's steps faltered the moment she saw the courtroom. It was so much bigger than the conference room, so many faces, so many eyes watching her. The overhead lights seemed too bright, the air felt too thick. Her breathing quickened, panic rising like floodwater. Then she saw him. Vincent Cara, sitting at the defense table, watching her with those cold eyes. Emma's entire body went rigid. Her face drained of color. She took one step backward, then another, clearly about to bolt. Rosa half rose from her seat, a small cry escaping her lips. But Rex was faster than panic. The German shepherd immediately positioned himself between Emma and Cara, blocking her view of the defendant. His large body became a wall, a shield, a barrier between trauma and its source. He pressed against Emma's legs, his warmth and weight anchoring her to reality. Sarah knelt beside them both, her voice urgent but calm. "Emma, look at me, look at Rex. You don't have to look at anyone else, just us." Emma's wild eyes found Rex's face. The dog held her gaze with steady, unwavering calm. His tail moved in a slow, reassuring wag. His expression communicated what Sarah's words couldn't. I'm here. You're safe. I won't let anything hurt you. Slowly, incrementally, Emma's panic receded. Her breathing steadied. Her color returned. That's it, Sarah whispered. Just focus on Rex. He's going to walk with you to that chair right there. See it? The comfortable one. And he's going to lie down right beside you. His job is to keep you safe, and he's very, very good at his job. With Rex pressed against her side, Emma walked to the designated chair. Each step was an act of courage that most adults couldn't comprehend. She was 3 years old, walking toward the memory of her worst nightmare, held together only by the presence of a dog. When she reached the chair, she climbed into it, and Rex immediately lay down beside her, his body parallel to the chair, his head resting on his paws within easy reach of Emma's hand. Sarah positioned herself on Emma's other side, creating a cocoon of safety. Judge Morrison's eyes glistened with moisture, but her voice remained steady. The witness is Emma Martinez, age 3. Emma, thank you for being here today. You're very brave. Emma stared at Rex, her hand buried in his fur. James Mitchell approached slowly, his usual prosecutor's intensity deliberately muted. He carried no files, no notes, nothing that might seem threatening. He'd memorized every question. "Hello, Emma," he said gently, stopping a respectful distance away. "My name is Mr. Mitchell. I'm a friend of your Grandma Rosa. Is it okay if I ask you some questions?" Silent, Emma's grip on Rex's fur tightened. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," James continued, his voice impossibly gentle for a man who'd sent dozens of criminals to prison. "But if you can tell us what you remember, it would help us a lot. It would help make sure nothing scary happens again." Emma looked at Rex. The dog gazed back at her, his brown eyes full of encouragement. "Can you tell me your name?" James asked. Nothing. The courtroom held its breath. "Can you tell me how old you are?" Still nothing. Seconds stretched into minutes. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, waiting. Marcus Webb shifted in his seat, a smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was exactly what he'd predicted, a waste of time, a traumatized child unable to provide reliable testimony. James tried different approaches. Simple questions, yes or no questions. Questions about Mr. Hoppy, about her favorite color, about Rex. Nothing worked. Emma remained silent, locked behind walls of trauma that even a facility dog couldn't fully breach. After 15 agonizing minutes, Judge Morrison called for a recess. "We'll take 10 minutes, she announced, though her tone suggested she was considering ending this entirely. James slumped at the prosecutor's table, his head in his hands. Sarah knelt beside Emma, her own heart breaking. Rosa wept quietly in the gallery. And then, during the recess, with most people stepping out of the courtroom, Emma did something no one expected. She leaned down, her face close to Rex's ear, and she began to whisper. The words were so quiet that even Sarah, sitting right beside her, couldn't make them out initially. But Rex heard. The dog's ears perked up, his entire body attentive. Emma was speaking. After 7 months of silence, after countless therapy sessions, after everyone had nearly given up, Emma Martinez was finally, miraculously, speaking. But she was only speaking to Rex. Sarah's eyes went wide. She glanced at James, who'd frozen at the prosecutor's table, his head snapped up. Even Judge Morrison, who'd paused at her chamber door, turned back. Emma continued whispering into Rex's ear, her small voice gaining strength with each word. And Sarah, trained for exactly this scenario, began to softly repeat what she heard, acting as an interpreter between child and court. "He came to the door," Sarah translated, her voice thick with emotion. "He was loud. He knocked really hard. Grandpa told me to hide." The courtroom had become a cathedral of hushed breath and racing hearts. bearing witness to a miracle wrapped in fur and courage. The preliminary hearing had taken a turn no one saw coming, and everything was about to change. The words tumbled from Emma's lips in whispered fragments, each one a precious jewel pulled from the darkness of 7 months' silence. She spoke only to Rex, her face pressed close to his ear, her small hands clutching his fur like it was the only solid thing in a world that had crumbled around her. "He knocked really loud," Emma whispered, and Sarah repeated softly for the court record. "Bang, bang, bang. Grandpa said, 'Emma, go hide.' I went behind the big couch. I took Mr. Hoppy." Judge Morrison had returned to her bench, moving so quietly her robes didn't even rustle. The court reporter's fingers flew across the keys, capturing every translated word. Rosa had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she heard her granddaughter's voice for the first time since that terrible October night. James Mitchell remained frozen at the prosecutor's table, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile moment. He'd prosecuted cases for 18 years, had stood in courtrooms through hundreds of testimonies, but nothing had ever felt like this. This raw, this sacred, this impossibly brave. "The door opened really fast," Emma continued, her whispers growing slightly stronger as Rex's steady breathing seemed to give her courage. "It made a big crash sound. The man came in. He was tall, really tall, taller than Grandpa." Sarah's voice cracked slightly as she translated, but she maintained her professional composure. "Emma, can you tell Rex what the man looked like?" Emma pulled back from Rex's ear just enough to look into his eyes, as if drawing strength from that chocolate-brown gaze. Then she leaned back in and whispered more. "He had dark hair, and a red jacket, a shiny red jacket, and his eyes were mean. They looked mean." Across the courtroom, Vincent Cara shifted in his seat. His attorney, Marcus Webb, had gone pale. The red jacket detail had never been released to the public. It was a crucial piece of evidence that only the true witness could know. "What happened next, Emma?" Sarah prompted gently. "What did the man do?" Emma's small body began to tremble. Her breathing quickened. This was the hard part, the memory that had locked her in silence for 7 months. Rex sensed the change immediately. Without any command, he shifted his position slightly, pressing more firmly against Emma's legs, his solid weight grounding her to the present moment. "He yelled at Grandpa," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "He said bad words, really bad words. He said, 'Where's the money?' But Grandpa said, 'We don't have money.' The man got really mad." Emma paused, her chest heaving. Sarah waited, not pushing, letting the child move at her own pace. The courtroom was so silent that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like thunder. "Can you tell Rex what happened then?" Sarah asked softly. "Grandpa tried to. He tried to make the man leave." Emma's whisper was barely audible now, and Sarah had to lean closer to hear. "But the man pushed him. Grandpa fell down. He hit the table. The lamp broke." The crime scene photos James had in his files showed exactly that. A shattered lamp, a fallen table, signs of struggle. Emma's account was matching the physical evidence perfectly. "The man had something in his hand," Emma continued, and now her voice was shaking. "Something shiny, silver and shiny. It wasn't nice. It was scary. A weapon." She was describing the knife that had been found at the scene, Kara's fingerprints all over it. "Grandpa got up. He said, 'Don't hurt my granddaughter.' He said, 'She's just a baby.'" Emma's whispers dissolved into quiet sobs. "But the man, he hurt Grandpa anyway. He hurt him really bad, and there was red, so much red. And Grandpa made a sound and then he didn't move anymore." Rosa's grief filled the courtroom. A mother's anguish at hearing how her husband died filtered through her granddaughter's innocent words. 2 bailiffs had to support her as her knees buckled. But Emma kept going, whispering into Rex's ear, the German shepherd absorbing every word with patient, infinite compassion. "The man looked around. He was looking for something. He took Grandpa's watch. the silver one Grandma gave him, and he took the money from Grandpa's wallet, and then, Emma's voice dropped even lower. He looked at the couch. He looked right where I was hiding. James felt his blood run cold. This was the detail that made Kara especially dangerous. He'd known a child was there. He'd looked for her. I stayed really still, Emma whispered. Like a statue, like when we play freeze tag. I didn't breathe loud, I didn't move. Mr. Hoppy didn't move either, and then, the man's phone made a sound. He answered it. He said, "Yeah, I got it, I'm leaving." And he walked to the door, but he looked back. He looked at the couch one more time, and I think he knew I was there. Marcus Webb shot to his feet, his face red. "Your Honor, I object. This is highly irregular. The witness is not testifying in a conventional manner. How can we possibly?" "Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Sit down now." The defense attorney sat, but his jaw was clenched with fury. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "the man you saw, the one in the red jacket who hurt your grandpa, is he in this room right now?" This was the moment, the identification. Without it, everything else was just a story. Emma pulled back from Rex's ear. Her small face was streaked with tears, her dark eyes haunted by memories no 3-year-old should carry. For a moment, Sarah thought she couldn't do it. But then Rex did something extraordinary. He stood up, turned his body to face the courtroom, and looked directly at the defense table. Not aggressively. There was no growl, no show of teeth, but with clear, unmistakable attention. He was showing Emma where to look, giving her permission to face her nightmare. Emma's hand gripped Rex's collar. Slowly, so slowly, her head turned. Her eyes swept past the prosecutor's table, past the court reporter, past the empty gallery seats. And then her eyes landed on Vincent Kara. The man met her gaze with cold indifference, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, and maybe, just maybe, fear. Emma's small hand rose from Rex's collar. One tiny finger pointed directly at Kara. She opened her mouth, and for the first time in 7 months, Emma Martinez spoke a full sentence out loud, not whispered to a dog, but declared to the world. "That's the bad man. That's the man who hurt my grandpa." Her voice was small, but it carried through the courtroom like a bell toll. And in that moment, everything changed. Marcus Webb erupted from his seat, papers flying. "Objection! This entire procedure is a mockery of due process. The testimony is unreliable. She's 3 years old, traumatized, clearly coached. I move to strike everything from the record." Judge Morrison's gavel came down with thunderous authority. "Overruled. Mr. Webb, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." She turned to Emma, her stern judicial face softening into something almost grandmotherly. "Emma, you've been incredibly brave today. Thank you for telling us the truth." Emma immediately buried her face back into Rex's fur, her small body shaking with the enormousness of what she'd just done. But she'd done it. She'd spoken. She'd identified her grandfather's killer. Sarah wrapped her arm around Emma's shoulders. Rex pressed closer, his steady presence surrounding the child like armor. James Mitchell remained motionless at the prosecutor's table, but tears streamed openly down his face. In 18 years of prosecution, he'd never witnessed courage like this. A 3-year-old girl and a German shepherd had just delivered justice against impossible odds. Judge Morrison called for a 15-minute recess to allow Emma to recover. As Sarah gently guided the little girl and Rex toward the door, every person in that courtroom, except Vincent Kara and his attorney, rose in spontaneous respect. They were witnessing history. They were witnessing a miracle. And they were witnessing what happened when love, in the form of a patient dog, gave voice to the voiceless. The 15-minute recess stretched into 30 as Judge Morrison retreated to her chambers, knowing the decision she was about to make would likely be appealed regardless of which way she ruled. Marcus Webb had immediately filed an emergency motion to exclude Emma's entire testimony, and the legal arguments that followed would determine whether Vincent Cara faced justice or walked free. In a small witness room down the hall, Emma sat curled against Rex on a padded bench, exhausted from the emotional ordeal of testifying. Sarah had given her apple juice and crackers, but the little girl had barely touched them. She simply held onto Rex, drawing strength from his presence. Rosa sat nearby, her rosary beads clicking softly as she prayed, her eyes never leaving her granddaughter. "You were so brave, Mija," Rosa whispered, reaching out to stroke Emma's hair. So brave. Grandpa would be so proud of you." But in Judge Morrison's chambers, a different kind of battle was unfolding. Marcus Webb stood before the judge's desk, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his silver hair gleaming under the office lights. He was a defense attorney who'd built his career on technicalities and procedural challenges, and right now, he was in his element. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with practiced outrage, "what we just witnessed in that courtroom was not justice, it was theater. Emotional manipulation designed to circumvent every established rule of evidence and testimony." James Mitchell stood on the opposite side of the judge's desk, his tie loosened, his face showing the strain of the morning. Beside him stood Dr. Rachel Kim, the child psychologist who'd been observing Emma throughout the testimony. "Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison said wearily, removing her reading glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose, "make your argument, but make it based on law, not rhetoric." Webb straightened, shifting into his legal assault. "First, the testimony is inherently unreliable. The witness is 3 years old, barely past toddlerhood. Numerous psychological studies show that children this young have difficulty distinguishing reality from imagination, have malleable memories easily influenced by suggestion, and lack the cognitive development to provide accurate testimony." "The witness provided specific details that match the crime scene evidence," James interjected. "Details that were never made public. The red jacket, the shattered lamp, the stolen watch. How could she know those things if she wasn't there?" "Coaching," Webb shot back immediately. "Grandmother, therapists, police, all had access to case details. The child could have absorbed information and constructed a narrative. Young children are notorious for false memories, especially after trauma." Judge Morrison held up her hand. "Dr. Kim, you've specialized in child trauma for how many years?" 15 years, Your Honor," Dr. Kim replied, stepping forward. She was a small woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but her voice carried authority. "And I can tell you that Emma's testimony shows every hallmark of genuine traumatic memory, not false construction." "Explain," the judge commanded. "Genuine traumatic memories in young children are typically fragmented, sensory-based, and emotionally consistent," Dr. Kim said. "Emma described sounds, the banging, the crash. She described visual details, the red jacket, the shiny thing. She described her emotional state, fear, stillness, the impulse to hide. This isn't a neat narrative someone taught her. This is how a 3-year-old brain processes and stores trauma." Webb scoffed. "With all respect to Dr. Kim, she's basing this on a child who whispered to a dog. A dog, Your Honor. How is that even testimony? The detective claims to have heard and translated, but there's no way to verify accuracy. This is triple hearsay at best." "It's not hearsay," James countered, his voice rising with frustration. "Detective Chen is a certified facility dog handler, trained and authorized to interpret and relay testimony facilitated by courthouse dogs. 38 states have recognized this practice. There's established case law." "In cases with older children and adults," Webb interrupted. "Never with a witness this young. You're asking this court to set a precedent that could undermine the reliability of testimony nationwide. What's next? We let kindergartners testify through stuffed animals. We accept crayon drawings as sworn statements." "Mr. Webb," Judge Morrison's voice cut through the argument like ice, "your sarcasm is noted and unwelcome. This court takes testimony from child witnesses seriously, as should you." Webb had the decency to look slightly chastened, but he pressed on. "Your Honor, there's also the matter of confrontation rights. My client has a Sixth Amendment right to confront his accuser. How can he confront a child who won't even look at him, who only whispers to an animal?" "She identified him," James said firmly. "In open court, with her own voice, she pointed at your client and identified him as the perpetrator. That's confrontation. That's direct testimony." After 30 minutes of whispering to a dog, Webb's face was reddening now, his composure slipping. And the whole setup was designed to be sympathetic, a cute kid, a friendly dog, creating emotional prejudice against my client. No jury will be able to remain impartial after that performance. "Performance?" James's voice went dangerously quiet. "That little girl just relived her grandfather's murder. She described watching him die. She faced her trauma to seek justice, and you're calling it a performance." "Gentlemen," Judge Morrison's gavel hand twitched, a warning that she was losing patience. "This is my chamber, not a boxing ring. Dr. Kim, in your professional opinion, was Emma's testimony reliable?" Dr. Kim didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Honor, absolutely. The consistency of her account, the correlation with physical evidence, the emotional authenticity, all support reliability. Moreover, the presence of the facility dog didn't compromise her testimony, it enabled it. Without Rex, we wouldn't have heard from Emma at all. The dog served as a bridge, not a distortion." "But can we trust that bridge?" Webb pressed. "Detective Chen could have misheard, misinterpreted, or even unconsciously altered what the child said to fit the prosecution's theory." Sarah Chen, who'd been waiting outside the chambers, was called in. She stood at attention, her police uniform crisp, her expression professional despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Detective Chen," Judge Morrison asked, "when Emma whispered to Rex, how confident are you in what you heard and relayed to the court?" "Completely confident, Your Honor," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I've trained for 3 years in this work. I've facilitated over 50 testimonies. I know the difference between what I hear and what I hope to hear. I relayed Emma's words exactly as she spoke them, to the best of my ability." "To the best of your ability," Webb pounced on the phrase. "So you admit there could be errors, misinterpretations, unintentional alterations?" "I admit I'm human," Sarah said evenly. "But Emma's final statement, her identification of the defendant, wasn't whispered to Rex. She spoke it aloud. The entire courtroom heard it. There's no interpretation needed there." Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking. Outside her window, Houston traffic moved in its endless flow, people going about their ordinary lives while in this chamber, the scales of justice teetered on a knife's edge. "Your Honor," James said, his voice carrying the weight of 18 years fighting for victims, "Emma Martinez is the only person who witnessed Vincent Cara murder her grandfather. She's the only voice Miguel Martinez has left. If we exclude her testimony on technicalities, we're saying that the very young and very traumatized don't deserve justice. We're saying that perpetrators can escape consequences simply by ensuring their victims can't testify conventionally." "And if we allow this testimony," Webb countered, "we're opening the door to unreliable evidence based on emotional appeal rather than legal standards. We're setting a precedent that could convict innocent people based on the misunderstood utterances of children too young to know what they're saying." Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. The weight of precedent, constitutional rights, a child's trauma, a murdered grandfather, and the future of justice all pressed down on her shoulders. "Gentlemen, Dr. Kim, Detective Chen, give me the room," she finally said. "I need to review the case law and make my decision. We'll reconvene in 1 hour." As they filed out, James caught Marcus Webb's arm in the hallway. "You know he did it," James said quietly, away from official ears. "You know your client murdered that old man." Webb's face was unreadable. "What I know is irrelevant. My job is to ensure he gets a fair trial. Your job is to prove guilt. Let's see if you can do it without relying on a 3-year-old and a dog." He walked away, leaving James standing in the hallway, feeling the crushing pressure of justice hanging by a thread. In the witness room, Emma had fallen asleep against Rex, her small hand still twisted in his fur even in slumber. The German shepherd's eyes were alert, watchful, as if he understood that his small friend's courage might not be enough against the machinery of law. An hour later, they were all back in the courtroom. Judge Morrison's face revealed nothing as she took her seat. The courtroom was packed now, word had spread, and every available seat was filled with court staff, lawyers from other cases, even some reporters who'd caught wind of the unprecedented testimony. "I've made my decision," Judge Morrison announced, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Emma sat with Rosa in the gallery, Rex lying at their feet. The little girl was awake now, sensing the importance of the moment. This court finds that Emma Martinez's testimony, while unconventional, meets the threshold for reliability and admissibility. James felt his knees weaken with relief. "The presence of facility dog Rex," the judge continued, "served as a necessary accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act and trauma-informed justice protocols. Detective Chen's facilitation was appropriate and professional. Most importantly, the witness's final identification was clear, direct, and unambiguous." Marcus Webb was already on his feet. "Your Honor, we will appeal." "I expect you will, Mr. Webb, but this case is proceeding to trial. The evidence, including Emma Martinez's testimony, will be presented to a jury. That is my ruling." Her gavel came down with finality. Vincent Cara's face paled. For the first time, the reality of consequences seemed to dawn on him. And in the gallery, a 3-year-old girl whispered to her grandmother, "Did we help Grandpa?" Rosa, tears streaming down her weathered face, held her granddaughter close. "Yes, Mija, yes, we did."